I'm going to talk a little bit about the economics of the situation and try and help to focus on exactly what's going on in Europe in terms of the negotiations. But I would like to start by echoing what Caroline said about just how exciting it is to see a government elected which is actually seriously challenging neoliberalism and this oppressive regime we've all lived under for 30 years. I think what I concluded about the election of the Syriza government is that real politics is back now. People have really grown tired of that sort of mantra of there is no alternative, the narrow boundaries of economics that we're told we have to live within. And, you know, as Zoe was saying, you know, the journalists that come at you expecting you to do bean counting and waving spreadsheets around. That's not what politics is about. Politics is about what our vision is for the future, and our vision rejects totally the politics of austerity. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit now about a guy who we didn't know very much until quite recently, Mr. Varoufakis, although we're all now able to pronounce his name. And he's obviously the new finance minister in Athens. And I particularly like him because he's made economics professors look cool, and that's quite an achievement. But I also like the way he always shows up on a large motorbike. You know, we'll query the motorbike, but, you know, with his leather jacket and his casual clothes. And there were some fantastic pictures that came out when he met George Osborne and made him look extremely uncomfortable. And, you know, that's the effect he has on European politicians as well. He's challenging the men in suits, not only sartorially, but also in terms of his knowledge of economics. And that's really excellent to see. I think the point he made, which was the most important point, is that the problem that Greece is facing is effectively a solvency crisis, not a liquidity crisis. So all the way through this problem with the Greek debt, the idea has been that if you just shovel more money into Greece just to keep it going, then eventually Greece will be able to pay back its debt. But that is mistaking the problem that they've got. And it is effectively a solvency crisis, and Greek debt has to be restructured. And Varoufakis presented that as the reality, and just as Costa says, it is the reality, and that's what makes Syriza realists. Because once you've reached a certain proportion of debt relative to your GDP, there is simply no way you can pay that back. No matter how you cut, no matter how you destroy the lives of people in your country, you will not be able to pay the principal back. And I think when you get into that situation, continuing to force people to repay that debt is just a form of cruelty, and it must be stopped. It must be stopped urgently. I think the other really important lesson from the Greek situation is about the design of the euro currency. Now, people in this room know that the Green Party always refused to get involved in the euro, and that's because when you lose control of your currency, you effectively lose control of your economy, and you are immediately in a fiscal straitjacket, joining with other members, and you cannot use your currency to help you with your economic problems. And this is really one of the problems that Greece has been facing. But the design of a single currency area puts responsibilities on all the partners in that euro currency area. It was always the case that some states were going to do better out of it than others, and Germany should have known that. Germany is the strongest economy in the Eurozone. It was always going to see inflows into its own economy, and it was always going to have to rechannel those back to the weaker economies of the periphery. That's just the reality of a single currency area. And the real problem we've got now is that the people in Germany either do not understand or will not accept that. And this is causing massive instability and tensions across the Eurozone. And in my view, it's just a misunderstanding of what a single currency area is and how it works. And what we've actually seen, of course, is the transfer of wealth from citizens of the Eurozone to the financiers of the Eurozone. So although we hear that money's being given to Greece, that money doesn't get to the Greek people. It gets stuck with the financiers and with the banks. And so the German people are being turned against the Greek people as though they're somehow bailing them out. And nobody's seeing this really crucial point that firstly, the Eurozone was always going to end up like that. And secondly, it's the financiers that are winning at the expense of the people. It's very important that we reframe the discussion of the Eurozone in that kind of way. Now, I have obviously said I'm really delighted to see that the government come to power in Greece that is refusing to allow its people to continue to be oppressed by austerity and by neoliberalism. But I also think we do have some concerns as Greens about the policy platform of Syriza. Particularly, I would echo what Kostas says about their commitment to environmental politics. It's very tempting when you've got a debt to try and get your way out of that debt by growing rapidly and generating income to use to pay your debtors. But the suggestions that the Syriza government might cut fuel duty or might make cheaper fossil fuel energy an answer to its economic problems must be resisted, I think, and I'm sure Kostas is doing his part there. I've also got quite a serious concern about we've had some discussions with Syriza politicians in the European Parliament, and I'm quite concerned that they should not accept this sort of caricature of Greece as somehow the lazy man of Europe. There's a sort of nasty, insidious racism that creeps into these discussions sometimes. We've all got corrupt politicians. We've all got people who don't pay their taxes. We've all got wealthy elites who are basically acting as cronies. I think it's really important that we see that, again, not as a national problem, but as an international problem, as a problem we all need to resolve together. And lastly, I think it's important that we think about exactly what's meant by the neoliberal dogma that we're rejecting. I mean, in the European context, they often use the phrase structural reforms. So it makes me laugh because they always say structural reforms, actually. So I always hear it as structural reforms. Anyway, structural reforms is just the kind of mantra that's used to address what neoliberal economics means in practice. And I think something we can usefully do is distinguish between the structural reforms we think are helpful in addressing the austerity problems of Greece and also our own economy, and the structural reforms that we feel are unhelpful. So in the category of good structural reforms, I would include ending corporate and private tax avoidance, challenging corruption and cronyism, and re-enhancing our democracy. And in the bad structural reforms, I would put a tax on the unions, destroying public services, undermining employment rights, and forced privatisation. And it's very noticeable in the Greek context that there's been a lot of emphasis put on the bad structural reforms and nothing like enough emphasis on the good structural reforms. So just to conclude, I would say that what we need to do in the Greek context and also in the context of our own economy is challenge the debt paradigm, challenge the nature of our economy which relies on debt, and actually question where that debt came from. I mean, Joseph Stiglitz, who cannot be an extremely radical economist because he's actually had the Swedish Bank Prize, sometimes called the Nobel Prize for Economics. And so, if Joseph Stiglitz can say that it's actually the money system and the debt-created money system that's the problem, and we really should think that's no longer a very radical thing to say. And the European Greens are joining with the call from Greece for a European conference on debt. We need to have a wide-ranging citizens' discussion about what debt means, how it's arisen, who our debts are owed to, and how the debt system relates to the way we create our money. And that's something we would very much support, not just within the Eurozone, but across the whole of the European Union. And lastly, again, coming back to what Kostas said about the social crisis in Greece, we also have a proposal from the European Greens for a Green Marshall Plan for coping with the very urgent social problems and rebuilding Greece's capacity to deliver essential public services. Thank you very much.